Hi my lovelies and welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. As it is New Year, it is the perfect time to think about making some positive changes to our lives. So I'm very chuffed to say that NordPass has sponsored this video because they can offer you an incredible service that can make your life simpler and safer, which we all like when we're trying to avoid crime. So NordPass is way more than just a password manager. It's essentially a cybersecurity tool that will make your life easier and safer. NordPass is a password manager. It's got a full range of features to ensure that your passwords are as secure as possible. Its easy to use interface makes staying secure effortless. This has been created by cybersecurity experts who built NordVPN, which is the advanced online security and privacy app, which is trusted by more than 14 million users worldwide. So very, very trusted service. Now, all of us right now know that cybercrime is huge. And people regularly find themselves being conned out of money or finding that their details have been leaked to unscrupulous criminals. We hear this on the daily. This is why your passwords are the literal key to securing anything you do online. They keep your email, your online banking account, your social media accounts, and everything else safe, which is why you need NordPass, because it stores your strong passwords in a secure vault so that you never forget them. It's essentially an encrypted vault, means that you are the only person in the universe with access to your passwords full stop, so you can feel 100% fully secure. NordPass remembers your passwords for you and it keeps them secure. It uses zero-knowledge encryption, which simply means you own the key to your passwords, so only you can ever open them. It even generates secure passwords, so you don't have to think one up yourself, which is great for me because literally, I spent years using the only password I could remember, which meant that one hack or data breach left me wide open to so many cyber fraud problems. Now, Nord's research, to be fair, to women, does suggest that lots of you out there are like me. About 49% of us use personal meanings and memories for passwords. That's why we really do need to rethink our cybersecurity. Now, using a VPN and a password manager together just makes sense. And it means that you're able to manage your online life, your online security absolutely effortlessly, which is brilliant for your personal peace of mind. And what a fantastic way to start the new year than with a bargain offer. Because yes, right now, you can get 70% off NordPass Premium at nordpass.com/EmmaKenny, or you can use the code EmmaKenny. And if that isn't enough to tempt you, well, you'll get an extra month completely free. So if you start your year the way that you want to go on, which is cyber secure with NordPass, you are going to protect yourself. And that's one thing that will give you peace of mind. All the links are below. And like I said, whatever you do, do not forget to use the discount code EmmaKenny. It'll make your life simpler. And like me, no longer just have one password that if anybody got hold of, they could break into anything, anywhere, anytime. Get protected. Use NordPass. Hi and welcome back to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. Thank you so much for joining me. If this is the first time and you've just found my channel by chance, well, I release crime content on a Wednesday and a Sunday every single week at the same time. So if you like a bit of crime and consistency, then this is definitely the channel for you. Also, if you like deep dive facts and also completely original content that you won't find on any other crime channel, then again, this is the channel for you. Because I have sources that other people do not have, which means that I get to introduce facts that you would not be aware of otherwise. Also, as ever, massive shout out to all of you who are here every single time I release. I love joining you on the live chats. If you haven't joined me in a live chat, I premiere each of my videos you just can come along and get support from the Kenny Crime Cult, which is growing. Also, massive thanks to my Patreon followers who support me financially, and that's amazing because it means I can make even more and more content. You guys all know I adore you. Always give me a like if you do like it. If you get your notifications on and you subscribe, well, you'll never miss an episode. And also, for any comment that you make, I read them all. Usually I respond, but also I'm really appreciative. When I don't get round to responding, it's not that I don't read them. It's just that there's so many that I can't necessarily get back to everyone. But thank you everybody. Okay, today's case is going to be one of those which literally leaves you with your mind boggled. It's the only way I can say it. It's one of those where the whole way through you'll be like, what? How? Why? How did this play out? I have no idea how we ended up in a situation where I'm going to tell you the story I'm going to tell you today. It is harrowing, horrific, unnecessary, and even though every single case that I cover is always chilling, there are just certain things that stand out in this one that makes you go, wow, how did this ever take place? I'm going to be talking about the Petit family murders. So the Petit family, they lived on Surgham Hill Drive, that was in Cheshire, Connecticut. The family involved 50-year-old Dr. William Petit and his wife, 48-year-old Jennifer Hawke Petit. They were a really happy family, a genuinely happy, very affluent family, in fact. William was an endocrinologist and he was working in Cheshire. He was considered one of the most top diabetes specialists in the US. And Jennifer, well, she was a paediatric nurse and a co-director of the health centre at Cheshire Academy private boarding school. They had actually met in 1985 where she was a new nurse. So that was how they connected and got together. They were both working at a children's hospital. William was in his third degree year of his medical degree at Pittsburgh University. They had two daughters. At the time of their deaths, the daughter was 17-year-old Hayley. She had literally just graduated from Miss Porter's school and she was due to start at Dartmouth College because she also wanted one day to follow in her father's footsteps and become a doctor. Also, to note about Hayley, she was a really unusual young girl because at 17, whilst a lot of us may have been at the pub drinking illegally or partying, I'm not saying like I did that, I did do that, but this kind of a girl for her age was one of those totally pro-social human beings. So not only did she want to be a doctor, from a really early age she'd worked tirelessly to raise funds for multiple sclerosis research, and the reason for that was her mother actually suffered from that condition. So Hayley was a very unique child in the fact that she had a very big heart, and she also knew that even at a young age, you could have purpose and make a difference to the environment that you actually experienced and inhabited. And she was doing that very much based on the fact that her mother obviously suffered with a condition, but testament to the kind of character that her parents had created. Also, there was 11-year-old Michaela. Now, Michaela was known as KK to her family. She was a student at Chase Collegiate School, and she was described by her family as a really gentle, thoughtful soul. And in fact, again, this is an 11-year-old child we are talking about. But even though she was only 11, she had already decided that when her sister left for college to study, she was going to take over the fundraising duties regarding the fundraising that Hayley was doing for MS. So this is a really unique family in the fact that firstly, they're all highly pro-social, secondly, incredibly close, also really, really concerned and considerate of the world around them and the impact that they can have upon that world. So this family is the all-American, archetypal, perfect family dynamic. It's as simple as that. They're what people aspire to be like. It's, if we're honest, when you think about bringing up a family and you think, what kind of kids do I want? Oh, really clever, pro-social ones who are going to make a massive difference to the world. They're the kind of kids that you want, and they embodied this. Certainly, I adore my children. Honestly, they're amazing, but they're not quite at the point where they're thinking about making such enormous differences to the world around them. And so whenever I hear about kids who are like that, you do have to acknowledge that they are special. So the crime begins that was going to play out disastrously for this entire family on the late afternoon of the 22nd of July 2007. And it was one of those situations that when I think about how people can become victims of crime, it just sparks that real reality that you can just be going about your business, absolutely going through the normal motions of everyday life. But if there is a predator in your midst that you're unaware of, even though you have done the same thing day in and day out your entire life, on this one occasion, everything can change. And that's exactly what happened. Jennifer's basically at the local grocery store. She's got her youngest daughter, Michaela, KK, with her. And all they're doing is buying food for dinner. That's it. They're just out shopping for food. Michaela was one of those people as a child who would like to cook for her family. So she was planning on helping her mum get the food so that she could then go home and cook for the family that evening. And that's all they were doing, just out shopping. But during their shopping trip, what they're unaware of is that 26-year-old career burglar Joshua Komisarjevsky spots them. And basically, they capture his interest. And later, he said it wasn't just the idea that he was thinking about what he could exploit from these people. So he could tell straight away that they were relatively affluent. And that meant, of course, that there was a potential of exploiting that and getting some financial gain. There was more to this situation because when he saw the mother and daughter, what he felt immediately was a sexual attraction to 11-year-old Michaela. And in fact, when he related how he felt to the police, he said that he thought that the pair looked nice. And they did. They did look nice. They were nice human beings. But undoubtedly, this individual saw not only a mother who clearly was affluent, but a child that he felt sexually attracted to. So then he starts following them home, wants to establish where they live. And what he sees is their home is literally the biggest one on the street. So again, instantly, he's recognizing this is an opportunity not just to exploit people financially, but also the fact is that there is this large house which would make him jealous. Secondly, make him think about the possibilities and potentials within that house. But remember, the thread that is running through this is that he has this triggered experience of being sexually attracted to a young child. So he's very much buying into the idea of what can play out under that roof. And that says something deeply disturbing about him. So let's just take a moment to look at who Komisarjevsky actually is as a character. So first of all, he's a crystal meth and cocaine addict. So we already at this point can see, well, unpredictability, dependency issues, and also when you have any kind of addiction, you're constantly looking at feeding that. Therefore, money is something that you are going to require. He had been hooked on drugs, so actually really physically dependent since he was about 19 years of age. He was born on the 10th of August 1980. His mother at the time was only 16, so he was born to a teenage mum, and understandably, right or wrong, the reality is it can be more challenging when you have a child at 16 years of age. His dad was a mechanic, and actually he wasn't much older than the mother. And at 2 weeks, he was given up for adoption. Most of us will accept and appreciate that children who are adopted usually find themselves in incredibly loving homes, and genuinely, in spite of the fact there'll be some psychological concern at points that maybe they weren't wanted by their biological parents, for the most part, they have lives that are very, very happy. But it can cause some confusion. Of course it can. The idea of being rejected as a baby is difficult. He got adopted by Benedict Komisarjevsky and his wife Jude. Now, these guys were very, very religious. And I suppose on one level that can be really positive, because logistically it tends to mean that you're brought up in a moral home, and it tends to be a scenario where the education you experience is one where you create these identities and understandings about who you should be as a human, as far as being a good human. But it's not always plain sailing, is it? particularly as you get older and you have questions to ask about the world itself. Certainly I did as a young person, my own children have. When you get to that point and you're like, is there really a God? Do I really need to act this way? And also, if you have a temperament or character that is maybe less morally created, then that can also be problematic, because the boundaries that you're pushing are even more challenging because they tend to be tighter and sterner, and that can lead to you feeling like you're failing a great deal when actually all it is you're in an environment that has such tight boundaries of expectation behaviourally that to some degree you often make mistakes. And if you were living elsewhere, it might not be that obvious to you, but let's take it that way psychologically, that that's what you experience. Well, that might mean that early on you start thinking that you're not good enough. Just putting it out there. Not saying it's the absolute truth, just a possibility. When he was growing up as well, history of recurrent childhood concussions. Again, important things to know. We know a great deal about the brain now. For example, things like damage in the orbital cortex can have a massive impact on the way that people respond violently. Also, what we know about the brain per se, if you have an issue of communication between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, that can make you more aggressive, also less likely to act in prosocial ways. So anything that can impact on the brain through injury is something that we do need to acknowledge. And he did have recurrent issues, meaning that there is a chance that there was some organic impairment there. In the early 1990s, Komisarjevsky's foster sister actually accuses him of sexually assaulting her. So that is a big red flag. Okay, we've got all these other issues. Maybe he's got poor boundary control. Maybe his impulse control is poor. Yes, he's been adopted. But when we're getting to a point where his actual foster sister is saying that he's sexually abused her, that is deeply worrying, because we're starting to see an introduction to a predilection that could prove very, very dangerous in his life and, of course, in the lives of individuals that he comes into contact with. And Komisarjevsky later on did claim himself to have been physically and sexually abused by his teenage foster brother. He said about between the ages of 4 and 6 this was happening, and he also mentioned that the way this abuse would take place, it isn't just the touching and engaging in sexual acts. Also, he'd make him pose in sexual positions with his foster sister. So, of course, when we think about the formation of certain violent predators, we also have to acknowledge that some of those violent predators have themselves been victims. And in this case, we are introduced to the concept that for this individual, he was not having a good experience in his life. He was struggling himself with abuse. But as opposed to acting on that in a way where he goes and seeks solace from his foster parents or adoptive parents, where he asks for help, it seems like instead he takes on the behaviour. So he again starts to play these things out. At age 14, again, another horrible incident according to him. He said he was raped by a close and, in his words, important friend. And I'm going to use that quote because abuse is always horrific. Sexual abuse is always conflicting, confusing, can make people feel so isolated, can make people feel a deep level of shame. These are all realities that we're all aware of when people experience sexual molestation. But often we forget that most of the time, and it is a big most of the time, these people who are actually abusing you are people trusting to you. They're individuals that you love, you care for, that have great meaning to you. So if somebody who is, in inverted commas, as he puts it, important in your life, and then they break every boundary of trust, well, that can completely alienate you from what you believe is possible as far as good relationships can be. Because if you can't trust the very people of more meaning to you, then who can you trust? And 14 as well is an incredibly challenging age to go through a whole series of different experiences. But to go through sexual abuse at that age, highly conflicting and can change people's lives permanently. So I'm not saying that this man who we're describing and forming now has had an easy life. But what most of us will agree on is when people go through these ultimately soul-destroying experiences, the last thing that it does is make them want to do the same to others. In fact, quite the contrary. The vast majority of people who are sexually molested, they would move hell and high water to prevent anybody that they love ever going through the same. But this man, in his developing experience, doesn't find that route. It seems he chooses an altogether different one. Also to note, at this age where he gets molested and raped, according to him, he also finds out he's adopted. We now know that it is so important to tell a child very, very early on that they are adopted, because if you don't, firstly, they have a false identity with their reality, i.e., you are my biological parents. Therefore, if they haven't been informed that from a very early age that yes, we are your parents, we love you, we adore you, you are the most important person in our world, but we didn't give birth to you. That's what makes you so special. That's why you're here with us, because we absolutely chose you. Yes, it's still going to be conflicting at some point. Everyone questions who they are and where they come from, and it can be a challenge when you're adopted to explore that. But because it's been there right from the beginning, you don't feel deceived. If your parent at 14, when you think that your life has just been this normal trajectory to some degree, tells you, by the way, we aren't your biological parents, you feel deceived. And if you've already had some fractures in trust, and he clearly had with the abuse and with the issues that he's faced, and then you find out that the two people who you thought were your sure things have actually not told you the truth your entire life, that can be deeply traumatic. And it's the same year that he's told about the fact that he's adopted that he starts using crystal meth. It's also the first year that he commits his first burglary at 14. So something switches. And it could well just be that sense of, if everybody in my world can lie to me, then why should I experience the world morally? Because if these people who are so religious have brought me up, have made me feel that there is a right and a wrong, and then it turns out that they haven't been living that to some degree, then why should I follow any system? And all of us appreciate that we have sympathy and empathy for people making decisions to tell children at certain ages that they're adopted because it's a challenge. But it's just recognizing that with the fractures in who he was, maybe his DNA, the head injuries, and all the things on top of that, and then this final understanding that actually he doesn't even belong to his family biologically, it could have switched something pretty important for him. And when I say that this seemed to switch something, I mean, really, he absolutely switched. In fact, in 2002 alone, he was arrested for 18 home invasions. That's a huge escalation in offending behaviour. And people said he would steal literally anything to support his drug habit. He later, when he was actually talked to by an attorney, explained to him that one of the things that he really used to enjoy doing was he'd creep into the house occupier's bedroom just so he could listen to them breathing. Yeah, just so he could listen to them breathing. It wasn't necessarily the fact that it was even the rush of stealing. It was knowing that he was violating their security. It was that acknowledgement that he could creep into somebody's home and be present in their most vulnerable of moments and know that he could do, if he wanted to, anything with them. That is what really, really brought him that sense of power. And that's very unusual. I mean, we hear about people who home invade to steal, peeping Toms who are voyeuristic. But just think about what he's saying there. Just that being in the bedroom and looking at that person asleep and listening to their breathing. And there are two things that really speak to me about that. Him standing in that room and looking at that person in bed and listening to them breathing and just feeling that power and dominion. Because they were helpless, right? But also, is there a part of him in his mind that's playing with the idea of, I could stop their breath? Is there this intention, just a thread of it, of possibility, that if he wanted to end their lives, he had the power to do that. And whatever reasoning, it's a very unusual psychological desire to fulfill getting involved in that kind of home invasion situation. And also worth noting, he was in and out of prison, and when we get to the crime, he'd literally only been released from prison 3 months earlier after a 5-year stretch. So this is a repeat offender, and like I said, when you consider being inside for 5 years in prison, a lot of offenders realise that they've learned they don't want to be back inside, it's not been a nice experience for them, and it's not necessarily that they're going to go on the straight and narrow, but it takes a little bit of time potentially to re-engage in offending because they've literally only just got their freedom. Not the case for this man. He has 5 years inside, then spends 3 months out of prison before we actually get to the crime that we're going to talk about today. So, as I noted before, Komisarjevsky has noticed Jennifer and Michaela at the shops. He's followed them home, and it's at this point he starts to text somebody that he knows, a 44-year-old Stephen Hayes. Hayes, very similar in the fact that he had a lot of problems. He was a crack addict, he was living with his mother at the time, and he had got a long history of substance abuse. And also, when you looked at his criminal record, he did have a long criminal record. However, it's worth noting, the record that he had was non-violent crimes and disciplinary problems whilst he was in jail. So he hadn't been involved in violent offending. He was born 30th of May 1963 in Homestead, Florida. Also worth noting that he hadn't had an easy ride growing up. His father was really physically abusive to him and to his brother and to his mother. And this man witnessed it whilst he was growing up. So he was very present when the violence was playing out, and he obviously was domestically abused as well. He also claimed he was sexually abused, and it's worth noting that his mother, who was clearly a victim of domestic violence, was also somebody who was very depressed most of the time, and she was a chronic alcoholic. So his life was challenging. Now, ultimately, she did leave, and she left her violent partner, and she took her kids with her. But I suppose one could say the damage was done to some degree. And Hayes, again, he very similarly starts taking drugs at 14. But not only does he start taking drugs at 14, his life has got to a point, and potentially as well under the influence of drugs, where he ends up getting admitted to a psychiatric hospital at 15. And I think we can all agree that when you're admitted to a psychiatric hospital, there has to be some really quite severe issues going on for you to be seen as somebody who should be an inpatient. So he obviously had a huge amount of issues in his life. Again, his criminal life started relatively early. So he's convicted of his first offence in 1980. He was 16 at that point. He was paroled, but in 1982, he breached the conditions of that parole within 2 months. So again, it shows you somebody who isn't able to manage that impulse control. When we get to the summer of 2007, he'd been arrested over 30 times. In fact, if I'm honest with you, the research suggests that he was pretty much in prison most of his adult life. His last stretch followed a 2004 conviction, and then he was paroled in 2006. Now, he had met Joshua Komisarjevsky at Silliman Halfway House 18 months earlier. And as many of you will know, it's where people are sent when they want prisoners to get back on track, essentially. And at this point, I think they probably were trying to make some kind of effort with their dependency issues, because they both attended Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings together. Now, whether that was just to do with their parole conditions, or whether it was due to the fact that they both recognised that they had dependency issues and needed to get back on track, I don't know. But certainly they were making efforts to attend meetings at that point. Now, the text messages exchanged between Hayes and Komisarjevsky went as follows. Hayes: I'm chomping at the bit to get started. Need a margarita soon? We still on? Komisarjevsky says, yes. Hayes responds, soon? Komisarjevsky says, I'm putting the kid to bed. Hold your horses. Hayes says, dude, the horses want to get loose. The messages indicated basically that they planned to invade the home and commit the robbery. And the worst bit is, of course, the Petits have absolutely no idea that they are just about to become the unlucky targets of these men's violence, aggression, and home invasions. Hayes would later claim the whole plan had just been to break into the Petit home, restrain the family, rob the family, and then just leave them unharmed. But I cannot even begin to describe to you how far outside the reality of what played out that initial consideration ever compared. Honestly, it was a world away compared to what actually played out. So, early hours, 23rd of July 2007, it's about 2 a.m. So William's fallen asleep in the sunroom. Apparently this was really commonplace because Jennifer, his wife, suffered from MS and she struggled at times to sleep. So if she got to sleep, he didn't want to disturb her. So he obviously had a very, very caring relationship with his wife and her needs very much came first. His kids, both daughters, finished watching TV about 11 p.m. They'd then locked up, gone to bed, and Michaela had actually gone and curled up in her parents' bed with Jennifer. They'd read the latest Harry Potter book together and then they'd fell asleep. And William had been left asleep on the couch. That in itself expresses that perfect archetypal family, isn't it? That little girl curled up in her mum's bed, just reading a book, feeling safe. Husband asleep downstairs, just allowing his wife to make sure that she got rest. Just that safe experience of just living your lives under your roof, feeling rightfully as if you're in the safest place in the world. Hayes and Komisarjevsky basically managed to gain entry to the property via the unlocked basement door. I always say to people, it's one of those really deeply regrettable things, isn't it? So many of us are so trusting in our homes. I'm so trusting. It took me a long time to be convinced by my husband that I needed to lock my doors in the day. I grew up in a world where my door was always open, not at night. You know, when you go to bed, you lock them up. But genuinely, I'd always felt really, really safe. It's only my husband who used to say, look, Emma, people can come in your home at any time. Criminals aren't just walking in because it's late at night. And it took me a long time to get to that point where I do now lock my door. But very often, people have got this myth of security. And as I've always said to you, what do killers do? They look for desirable, available, and vulnerable people. And you're vulnerable and available if you have your doors open. So that's really sad that that basement door is unlocked. They also come in armed with an air rifle and rope. Now, bear in mind what we've been told about the initial anticipated ideas behind this. It's meant to be a home invasion and a robbery. It's late at night when they expect people to be asleep. So arguably, why do they need the rifle and the rope? I asked that question because I'm not sure that was the intention of this robbery. I really am not. I think that's organised to a degree where the rifle is going to scare the victim if you come across them, and the rope is going to restrain them, which you won't need to. If you have a rifle that's going to scare them, the person's likely to just let you take what you want. So what was really going through their minds? So they get in, they start ascending the basement stairs to the ground floor, and at this point, Komisarjevsky actually spots a baseball bat which is leaning against the wall. He picks it up and he starts searching the house for valuables. And that's when he finds William asleep. Now, bear in mind, what is this meant to be? This is a home invasion, right? This is where he's going to just get valuables and leave. And yet, Komisarjevsky gets that baseball bat and he strikes William around the head 4 or 5 times at full force. And let me tell you, he split the top of William's head and forehead wide open. So obviously William is completely incapacitated, very badly injured, totally unconscious. At this point, he gets the rope and the zip ties and he binds William's wrists and ankles. So now William is completely helpless. This is meant to be a robbery. And as far as he's concerned, he's potentially just killed his first victim. And just to put it in context, when he tied the wrists and the ankles of William, he tied so tightly with those zip ties that they cut into his wrists and the ankle bones cut into each other. That's how seriously tight they were. So then they begin searching for cash. They can't necessarily find very much, because how many of us actually have a lot of cash in our homes anymore? This is the irony, isn't it? Most of us do not have cash in our homes. You know, we have a few pounds or a few notes, but we don't carry large amounts of it. So they can't find it, and clearly they're very, very disappointed about it. Now, Hayes would later tell police it's at this point that the initial plan, which is to go in, rob the family, take what they can, turns into something far more sinister. So there's a tipping point. Suddenly it goes from being a home invasion to something far darker. They find Jennifer and Michaela in the master bedroom where they're sharing a bed. Hayley's in her own room, and it takes them moments to overpower them. I mean, come on, these are two young girls and a mum. The mum's going to be only firstly concerned about what's happening to her children. She'll do whatever it takes to protect them, including just complying. And Michaela and her sister are obviously just going to be horrified that there are two strangers in their home. He takes Michaela from her mother's bed to her own room, and then they basically tie them all up, spread eagle, to their bedposts with rope. So immediately, why would you tie up women and girls, spread eagle, to their bedposts with rope? We're instantly drawn into a sexual motive. That is not what you would do. If you were going to tie them up, you would tie them up. You might put their ankles together, you might put their hands together. To tie them up spread eagle, it is sexual posing per se. So before they've even touched them, they've created a scenario where those girls are vulnerable and exposed to potentially being harmed sexually. They also covered their heads with pillowcases, and at this point they also rip the telephone leads from the wall. So they are there for a period of time in their heads, aren't they? They've made sure that the family is unable to defend themselves. They're now making it impossible for them to call for help. So they're not thinking about getting in and out, are they? This is becoming much more than a simple hit and run. This is becoming a protracted, drawn out crime. And the state of the crime is changing too. Now, William, well, literally has been unconscious for around 2 hours at this point. So all this has been playing out, and he has been unconscious for 2 hours. And what's really scary for him, he'd been taking blood thinners because he's got a heart condition. And because of that, when you're taking blood thinners like warfarin, one of the big problems is if you get a cut, you can bleed out really quickly. So he bled out a lot faster. Now he awakes to find Hayes pointing a gun at him and Komisarjevsky holding this bloodstained bat. Now, he's disorientated, absolutely no idea where his wife and daughters are, absolutely horrified and terrified, of course he will be. And he's basically told at this point, if you move, we're going to shoot you. In fact, they said they would put 2 bullets in him. So William is bleeding profusely from his head wounds and obviously terrified. And he just starts screaming, which you would do. And actually, that's the right thing to do. My God, at least screaming could draw attention to you. They then say, look, be quiet. Don't worry about things. All we want is your money. They then drag him down to the basement and they tie him up to this support post. And bizarrely, this is one of those things, a bit like when Dennis Rader used to go in and murder people. Often, if they were uncomfortable, and they said they were, he'd do something to try to make them more comfortable before he murdered them. But nonetheless, obviously, Williams doesn't look comfortable, and so Komisarjevsky actually gives him a pillow to try to make him more comfortable. Then he throws a quilt over his head and he leaves him there. Remember, William is bleeding out at this point, so he's in a dangerously precarious situation between life and death. Then the 2 criminals carry on ransacking the house, looking for valuables. They're searching cupboards, they're searching drawers, and they do find $125 in Hayley's purse, but clearly they are not satisfied with that at all. But then as they're rooting around, they come across a bank book, and the bank book says it's got $30,000 in it. So Hayes and Komisarjevsky decide they want to steal this from the family. And to do that, remember we're in the middle of the night, they need to wait until the bank opens in the morning, and they decide that the best way of doing that is they can take Jennifer with them to make sure that she gets the money out. And that's the way that they'll attain this larger amount of cash. So in between the hours of the bank opening and then being at the scene of the crime, all they do is just sit around and they drink beers that they find in the fridge. Now, around 7 a.m. in the morning, Hayes actually leaves the property and drives to the petrol station locally. He's actually captured on CCTV filling 2 gas cans that have been taken from the Petit property. He gets $10 worth of petrol. Then he returns to the Petit home. So for whatever reason, he's found the need to go and fill up 2 gas canisters full of petrol. So you have to think, what is he planning? Why would you want to do that? What's the point of getting those gas canisters filled with petrol? But in itself, I think that that's potentially because something is going through both of these criminals' minds where they believe that they may need petrol. Even though this is apparently a home invasion, are there some darker thoughts going on? For example, do they want to leave witnesses? Now, in the basement, of course, William is in this situation that's awful. He can kind of hear what's going on. And William actually heard Jennifer telling the intruders that she was going to need to get a checkbook before going to the bank. He also heard her make a call to his practice where he worked, saying he couldn't come into work that day because he's ill. So that must have been so frustrating because he can kind of see that she's trying to cajole these individuals into understanding that she will do whatever it takes to give them whatever they want. But he is defenseless and powerless and desperately unwell at this point. But he has no power whatsoever. To imagine where William is in this moment must just be unbearable. Agony. Later that morning, Hayes takes Jennifer out to his vehicle, which is a Chrysler Pacifica SUV. Now, Komisarjevsky stays in the house with her daughters because obviously she's going to do whatever it takes to make sure her children are safe. So they are clever in the fact that they know that basically Jennifer will do anything to protect them. So Hayes drives her to the local Bank of America. At this point, he says to her to take $15,000 out when the bank opens. He also says, if you comply, your family is going to survive. It's going to be fine. He stays in the vehicle, obviously doesn't want to get captured on CCTV, and Jennifer goes into the bank. She knows that her family's life is absolutely under threat if she tries to get help. Can you imagine that? The psychological agony of knowing that you are literally holding the lives of your family in your hands. And what do? What would you do? Would you just go ahead, get the money, hopefully get back, allow your family to be free, then deal with the trauma knowing that you're safe? Or would you take a risk? Would you find that courage within you to say, we're under threat, help? The CCTV captures that interaction. Jennifer walks calmly up to the counter, and she does. She's in control. Even though she's dealing with abject terror, she walks up to that counter and she looks directly into the eyes of that assistant and she says, my family is being held hostage. She tells her, if I don't withdraw $15,000, they're going to kill my children. She says that the captors were being nice and that they believed that they only wanted money, but that she needed help. Can't imagine how brave that must have been to find that courage to just think, they may kill my children, but I know that if I don't ask for help right now, we have less chance of surviving. That assistant who served Jennifer said that she looked absolutely petrified when she was saying those words, that her hands were trembling. First thing the assistant does, contacts the police. And they do that whilst Jennifer is still in the bank. The person who dealt with Jennifer relays what's being said. And at 9:24 a.m, Jennifer withdrew $15,000. And that was despite the fact that they didn't have those funds in the account at the time, but she was still given it. She leaves the bank. She gets collected by Hayes. And obviously at this point is praying, just praying that that assistant is going to help her. Despite that urgent call from the bank, manager made it to the police. They were unbelievably slow to take any positive action whatsoever. Bear in mind, a terrified woman has just entered the bank, withdrawn $15,000, said her whole family are under pain of death and threat in their home. The bank manager has alerted the police immediately. What would you imagine would happen? Well, I would imagine the police would get to the house, rush in, probably armed, take out the people who were threatening those individuals, either by force or on pain of death, and the job's done. No. Now, what actually happened is this. Basically, also to mention, when that phone call was made, a patrol car was literally almost by the bank at the time. So that could have been dealt with straight away. And in fact, that car itself was told to intercept a Chrysler Pacifica. So this officer drives around to intercept this car, but doesn't spot it. So the car just gets to go away. That was an opportunity to save Jennifer in that moment. An opportunity to intercept and save that woman. And it would have saved her family too. Now, following this, when obviously the police are now aware that this has taken place, the police decided that what they were going to do was they were going to take a step back and they were going to assess the situation. So the way they do this is they basically assemble a perimeter in the area around the Petit home, because they make a decision that this is a home invasion and a robbery that's taking place. So therefore, there's no immediate rush. In fact, to add insult to injury, they initially thought that Jennifer, the person who's been kidnapped, might have been a suspect in the robbery because apparently she was very calm at the bank. I mean, which profiler was involved there? Of course she was calm in the bank because she thought that if she looked anything but calm, they were going to murder her children. So this is the way that they decided to deal with it. They thought, well, you know, the robbery is going to take place. They're going to end up leaving the house with the goods. We'll get them then. That's what the plan was. So they basically didn't want to reveal the fact that they were there because they just wanted to wait till the robbers walked into their police cars, basically. So they just do nothing. And when I said you were going to be frustrated about this, that's why. Because the emergency services were alerted by that heroic action of Jennifer and the woman who took her seriously in the bank and the manager who instantly called the police. They all did the right thing, and the police horrendously misjudged the situation. And I cannot tell you how horrific the ramifications of this are. They wasted half an hour thinking that way. Half an hour. Just, should we intercept? Maybe we should just wait outside. Maybe Jennifer's orchestrated this, and so on and so forth. And believe me, that 30 minutes that I'm talking about, that's when the whole of the crime was drastically modified. Because, believe me, authorities would soon be dealing with something far worse than a home invasion and robbery. Whilst Hayes had taken Jennifer to the bank, obviously her daughters had been left alone with Komisarjevsky. I remember what we know about Komisarjevsky and his history and his strange predilections and the accusations of his foster sister and so on and so forth. So these girls, they're locked in their bedrooms, they're tied, spread eagle to their beds. It's at this point that Komisarjevsky decides that he wants to sexually assault 11-year-old Michaela, KK. 11 years old. He performed oral sex on her, this little girl, this child. absolutely horrified, father bleeding out downstairs, mother being taken from her, 11. Prosecutors would also claim that he actually forced her to take a shower after he'd done that to her because he wanted to remove the DNA evidence. And when they analysed Michaela's clothing, they also found bleach on it, so another probable crude attempt to destroy the DNA evidence. Then if that isn't terrible enough, he then ties her back to the bed. Now he would reflect on this and say, oh, I didn't realise that she was 11. I thought she was maybe 14 or 15. Well, it makes no difference, you rapist. You know, that's what drives me mad, when you get these kind of criminals who minimise their actions because they're like, well, I did sexually assault them, but you know, they were 14 or 15. I would never have sexually assaulted an 11-year-old. What you are is a sadistic rapist per se. Age is not something that figures here, although yes, we will all agree the reprehensible nature of affecting a child of that age this way. Unbelievable. And it's not just like he sexually assaulted her. He took explicit photographs of her. So between 7:27 a.m. and 8:09 a.m, he posed her in various sexual situations whilst he basically pleasured himself. And also, no matter what he reflects on what he did, when they did analysis on her body, they found Komisarjevsky's semen in her body. Now, he claimed that basically he'd taken those pictures purely so he could blackmail her parents at a later date, but none of us are going to believe that. Because why would her parents feel blackmailed by images of their child? No, he would be the one going to prison for taking indecent pictures of a child, and then he'd have to sign the sex offenders register forever because of it. It's not like they would pay him off because they were embarrassed that he had explicit pictures of their child. It would just be that he was a criminal who needed to serve a lengthy sentence. So the fact that he's doing this, we can see this isn't a home invasion. This is a protracted sex attack. Now, before the events even get worse, and they do get worse, guys, there is going to be a horrific murderous turn in this story. In the last shot on his phone is an older female, and she's basically posed with her legs apart. That's no doubt Hayley. You can't see it's Hayley, but it's an older girl in situ in the home. It can only have been her. And also, when the police forensically examined Komisarjevsky's phone, they actually also saw lots of graphic images of him sexually as well. So this is an individual who clearly enjoys that kind of imagery, both of himself and of other people related to those situations. Now, while all these horrible things have been happening to Jennifer's daughter, obviously she's been out getting the money, hopefully trying to save her children and her family. They then arrive back at the property. Now, one of the things I'd say about the extended members of the Petit family is that they are absolutely right in criticising the absolute disaster that was the police response. It was so slow. The missed opportunities to save this family are just unforgivable. Absolutely unforgivable. Because when Jennifer and Hayes arrive back at the house, a police officer actually sees them pull up in the driveway, sees two people get out, and takes no action. Now, Hayes also told police that one of the reasons that he sexually assaulted Jennifer when he got back was that Komisarjevsky actually encouraged him to do that. He'd obviously been assaulting the girls, and he wanted it to make a level playing field, so tells Hayes that he should go ahead and do this. So he binds Jennifer's wrists and ankles with the ligatures, and then he rapes her on the living room floor. And literally, when he's asked why by the police did you do that, well, Hayes says, I wanted to square things up after Komisarjevsky's rape of Michaela. I mean, only a criminal mind can think that way. I mean, that logic is just ridiculous. Now, in the basement, William, of course, is hearing things because even though he's bled out and he's desperately unwell, he's conscious, and he can actually hear his wife being raped because there's this rhythmic thump, thump, thump on the floor. And in spite of the fact that he's mortally wounded to some degree, he's shouting, "Hey, stop," you know? And one of the perpetrators actually shouts down to him and says, "Don't worry, it'll be over in a couple of minutes." And William said that chilled him to the bone because he absolutely knew what they meant. That they were going to kill him and that they were going to kill his family. And all he could feel was this desperate urge to save them. Now, bear in mind, this man is nearly dead. I cannot get that across enough. This isn't a guy with an injury in his head where he's a little bit confused. He is nearly dead. But he said in that moment, when he realised that he wasn't going to see his wife and children again, he had to do something. And he just felt this surge of adrenaline. And all he had going through his mind, and I'll quote him, "I thought it's now or never." Because in my mind at that moment, I thought they were going to shoot us all. So by standing up and sitting down, remember he's been tied to that support pole, he starts trying to break the plastic zip ties that are binding his hands, and amazingly he manages to struggle free from his restraints. Now bear in mind, there is no way at this point that he can go and attack the people who are attacking his family. It's impossible. He's too badly injured. What he knows he has to do is to get help. So he crawls to the basement bulkhead door. They're still unlocked from where these guys got entry. So obviously his main aim now is to get out. He crawls out, can't walk, literally cannot walk because he's so badly injured. And he said he literally rolled almost to his neighbour's house. His ankles are still bound. He's bleeding out in a horrific state. Now, when the neighbour finally answers the door, William was so badly injured that even though they'd seen each other pretty much every day for the time they lived next door to each other, his neighbour didn't recognise him because this man looked like he was on death's door and was so badly injured he didn't recognise the face that he'd seen a million times before. And one of the reasons for that is he'd lost 7 pints of blood. 7 pints of blood because of those injuries. Can you imagine that? So his neighbour, of course, calls emergency services. And at this point, the police had finally decided that they needed to move in on the family home. Finally. So an officer approaches the neighbour's home with a rifle. At this point, sees how badly injured William is, and then says, "Is anybody else in the house?" And he says, my girls are in the house." Now, again, with respect to the police officer, at this point, he doesn't actually know whether William is the victim or the suspect, but leaves his ankles bound because of the fact that he doesn't know whether it's the victim or the suspect. Just going to throw it out there, Mr. Police Officer, who's waited a large amount of time to go and help. He had his ankles bound. Take a guess. Go on, have a punt. Is he the victim or is he the perpetrator? With his ankles bound, with zip ties, bleeding out at his head. Is it just me? Is that just me? I wouldn't need to know whether he was a victim or a suspect if he looked like a tied up victim. Anyway, this is all playing out, and it's at this point the officer notices smoke pouring from the Petit family home. Because, unbeknownst to William, Komisarjevsky has discovered that he's gone. So he now knows that William has made an escape, and that means that the likelihood is the emergency services are coming. So this is also during the point where Hayes is still raping Jennifer. So he gets alerted straight away during this process that suddenly there is a time issue. Hayes then looks through the window and he sees the patrol car, which is pulled up, and he gets angry and he panics. And in that moment, instead of just doing what you would imagine anybody in that situation may wish to do, i.e. escape, no. They decide what we need to do is to destroy the evidence. to destroy the evidence. And what does that mean? Because the only evidence is the family. Within moments of seeing that patrol car, within moments of realising that William has made an escape, they strangle Jennifer to death. They then pour petrol on her body. And then that pair of criminals, that pair of rapists, that pair of child molesters, they go through the entire house and they douse it with petrol. They went into Michaela and Haley's rooms. They're conscious, awake, traumatised by the sexual assaults that they've just been exposed to. And those two men, they pour petrol all over them. These girls are tied to their beds, being doused in petrol. And then those criminals simply take out a cigarette lighter and ignite the petrol. Both of them run from the house completely unscathed. I actually escape in the Petit family car and they get pursued by police. And for a while, to be fair, they are followed by the police. It's a very brief chase because it basically ends when a getaway vehicle smashes head on into the police car barricade that's there. So they are only able to escape one block and then they're arrested there. But they left those children in flames. The Petit family home, the fire took hold rapidly. There was thick smoke just billowing from the house. Jennifer was already dead because she'd been strangled. Her children tied helpless to those beds. And those flames were so intense, so immense, that the firefighters literally couldn't get to them. So even though the emergency respondents were there was no way that they could have rescued them from that burning building. That in itself is just utterly, breathtakingly devastating. When they did the autopsy on Jennifer's body, one of the things that came out was that firstly, her body was burnt beyond recognition. She had to be identified through her dental records. They did see that there were still ligatures on her wrists and ankles. They could also see that her larynx had been fractured. And the medical expert who examined her body said it would have taken between 8 to 15 seconds for her to actually lose consciousness while she was being strangled, which is awful, but to some degree, she was not alive when her body was on fire. Michaela and Haley, it was different though. They did die from smoke inhalation, but when they did the autopsies, they actually revealed that both the girls would have experienced significant pain from breathing in smoke and soot. They would have felt disorientation, nausea. They would have felt an inability to breathe shortly before their death. And that their deaths, as in being rendered unconscious so that they weren't aware of what was happening, would have taken several minutes. Literally, they would have been aware of what was happening. And think about what it's like. A minute in time in pain is just terrifying for most of us. It's unusual for most of us. Certainly, incredible agony is something that very few of us experience for more than seconds at a time. But several minutes. And all that time they were breathing in this searingly hot, toxic air. Also, both of the girls suffered absolutely horrific burns. It is unclear whether those burns happened before or after death, but those burns were just disfiguring beyond belief. Michaela's body was actually found still tied to the bed, so she died there. But firefighters, well, they found Haley's body at the top of the stairs. So that little girl had managed to escape. She'd managed to get out of those restraints. But unfortunately, because of the toxicity and the heat she had inhaled, she just collapsed. Also, she actually suffered 4th-degree burns to the soles of her feet. So if any of you think about burns, when we're talking 4th-degree burns, we're talking literally skin to bone burns. Literally, the flesh has just been decimated. So she must have got really close to the flames at some point. Again, those burns may have happened after death as opposed to before, but the fact that she'd managed to escape and then got overcome suggests that she probably was dealing with being horribly burnt at that point. It's an 11-year-old child. That house invasion, it lasted over 7 hours. Can you imagine the psychological aggression that family dealt with? The physical, the psychological, the sexual, all of these things. And all that had provoked it was a mother and a daughter going to the shops to buy a meal for that evening. The only thing that connected those predators from those victims was that moment. Now, obviously, the police have apprehended both of the criminals, and during the interrogation, one of the things that the police actually noticed was a really strong smell of petrol coming from Hayes. And he actually did confess at the initial quite readily. So in a 70-minute confession, he actually said to the police, look, we did plan to commit a robbery. We had no money. His life sucked, he said. He said his mother wouldn't let him use a car and had basically given him a week to move out. So police said that when they were interviewing him, it was very much about who he was, what was wrong with his life, why life was so challenging for him. It was very self-pitying and indulgent. But what they also were really shocked by was the fact that when you consider what's just played out, Hayes just showed no emotion throughout the interrogation at all. He was just flat. Now, Komisarjevsky, he had this 3-hour confession to the police. He also expressed absolutely no remorse or emotion. And in fact, they did that classic thing, didn't they? Where both of them decided, well, how am I going to play this? Shall I admit my crime fully? Shall I acknowledge that I'm a reprehensible human being without morality or conscience? Maybe I should do that for a change. No, they just blamed each other. Of course, they were like, no, it was Hayes. And Hayes was like, no, it's Komisarjevsky. It was him. It's always the way, isn't it? They were like, each party was apparently the driving force behind the killings. So at this point, allies in real life, but not when they're caught. Apparently they're enemies. It's as simple as that. At one point as well, let's put it out there, they even draw William, the victim, who was baseball attacked at the very beginning of the crime. Yet they say that he was an accomplice. I mean, it makes no sense. But that drawing in this idea that somehow they were merely there to carry out a crime that William had asked them to do. And I guess that we do see that play out, don't we, in crimes where a crime has been orchestrated to remove family members by an individual who wants to inherit and so on and so forth. But there were no indicators whatsoever. William was just an incredibly loving person who wanted to save his family. Now, Hayes and Komisarjevsky are ultimately charged with 17 offences relating to the home invasion murders. Whilst the trial is being awaited, one of the things that I'll note about Hayes is he did try to kill himself on more than one occasion. So I'm not saying that's to do with morality, by the way. I think we can all agree that certain perpetrators do not like the idea of a life inside prison. And with these kind of potential convictions, you are never going to see the light of day. That is one thing that we know well about the States. At the end of the day, if you commit crimes like this, your days as a free person are over. Now, the killings themselves got major national and international attention, and they should have, because let's be honest, massive mistakes were made. And in fact, they drew so much attention that there was a significant impact on Connecticut's death penalty. And the death penalty itself in that area got delayed, as in its abolition, because of the fact that this crime was so heinous. So it was looking at being abolished. This crime occurs, and those in charge were like, no, wait a minute. This kind of a crime potentially requires the death penalty. So in 2009, the Connecticut General Assembly sent draft legislation abolishing capital punishment to Governor Rell to sign. Now, instead, Rell vetoed the bill, and he referred in that vetoing to the Petit murders as a reason to continue state-sanctioned execution. This is what he said. I have long believed that there are certain crimes so heinous, so depraved, that society is best served by imposing the ultimate sanction on the criminal. Strong words. And clearly, when you're looking at literally vetoing the death penalty, and then there is this crime that has such a visceral, cerebral, experiential reaction, that even though you have the actual power to stop the death penalty, you're like, no, this crime meets what I believe is correct to put people to death. Now, you won't be surprised that both Hayes and Komisarjevsky both pled guilty. They said there is so much evidence against us that beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt, we're just going to accept the fact that we are bang to rights. Said no criminal ever in that situation. No, they were like, yeah, we aren't guilty at all. Yeah, not guilty. Didn't happen. Not guilty to murder. Didn't do it. I always think, who are the people defending them? It's got to be the case. I know I do this in my videos a lot, but it's true, isn't it? Can you imagine being a defence lawyer? You're going not guilty? Yes. You're on CCTV. The police were literally outside the house. You set fire to it after murdering and sexually assaulting people. And then we caught you a block away when you crashed into a getaway barricade. Yeah? And you're going not guilty? Yeah? I mean, I could never have been a defence barrister because I'd have been like, I can't represent you. You are very stupid, as well as being a murderous, horrific human. And I'm actually going to vote for the death penalty as well, even though I'm meant to be on your side. Just saying. So they plead not guilty to these charges. At this point, it's worth noting that the prosecution claimed that Jennifer and her daughter's murders were actually premeditated. And I would agree. It's what I said earlier on. Why did Hayes go to the petrol station with empty cans? What was the point? If they weren't intending to set fire to that home, why did they do that? Also, during the trial, they submitted entries from Hayes' prison diary. And in one entry, Hayes actually blames William for the family's death. He basically said that it was William's fault because he was a coward because he didn't stop it. Now, whether he's saying that William should have fought back and prevented them going ahead with the killings, I don't know. But it makes no sense because William had his head caved in by a baseball bat whilst he was asleep and actually did, in spite of that, heroically try to get help for his family. But nonetheless, Hayes is deflecting and minimising his own behaviour there, isn't he? Hayes also tells the court during the trial that the original plan had been to just break into the home, tie up the residents, take the money and then leave. But he said during that period passing, it just became completely out of control. And I think we can all agree on that point. Now, on the 5th of October 2010, after about 4 hours of deliberation, a jury of 7 women and 5 men found Hayes guilty of 16 of the 17 counts. Again, always bring to note, 4 hours is an incredibly short amount of time. They knew he was guilty beyond belief. There was no, oh, is this guy potentially guilty? Could this have been just something that went wrong? Was William involved? It was like guilty as hell, simple as that. And what the jury have to do in that moment, they have to decide between life imprisonment or the death penalty. Hayes' attorney argued for the former. In fact, this is what he said. Life in prison without the possibility of release is the harshest penalty. It's a fate worse than death. If you want to end his misery, put him to death. If you want him to suffer and carry that burden forever, the guilt, shame, humiliation, sentence him to life without the possibility of release. On the 8th of November, the jury came back and were like, we've thought about that, we've considered that, it was a good argument, we like the idea of him suffering forever, but we've decided, die, gave him the death sentence. Now, with respect, even though on one level, a lot of you will be like, brilliant, he deserves a death sentence, it really gets me that when that death sentence was passed, Hayes smiled. He smiled when he heard that decision. And the attorney later stated, he is thrilled. He's very happy with the verdict. That's what he's wanted all along. Now, I don't like prisoners getting what they want. Equally, I don't like the fact that some human beings have such horrible childhoods that actually they don't value their life at all. And we know that Hayes certainly didn't value his life or other people's lives. That's why he could act so reprehensibly. But I also want to acknowledge that that's not a normal reaction. The idea of being killed is not what the vast majority of us would ever see as something positive. And on one level, we can say, well, maybe that is the inescapability of not having to go to prison and live that life out there. Or it could be that ultimately he feels so little value for who he is that the idea of having him snuffed out of reality is a positive thing. Arguably, though, if you're going to hell, it's a long time burning. Just saying. Now, on the 2nd of December, he was formally sentenced to death by Judge John Blue. And Judge John Blue said this is a terrible sentence, but is in truth a sentence you wrote for yourself in flames. May God have mercy on your soul. I have to say, I think the reason he said a sentence you wrote yourself in flames wasn't just about the fact that he set fire to the house. I think he's also talking about that sentence that he may have in hell with the devil, who I don't think is going to be a nice host. Just saying. I know I haven't got evidence that the devil is real, but I think the conscience that you have is the devil to some degree. And I think as we continue in our everlasting self, in wherever we go in the big, beautiful beyond, you better try and make sure your conscience is as clear as possible, because an eternity with the agony of the actions and the horror that you've caused other is no eternity of anything but pain, in my opinion. Or if the Bible and other areas is right, it's an elevator down to a very hot place and it's not going to be nice. So at the hearing, William actually got to give an impact testimony, and it always breaks my heart when I do this because of the fact these are real people, these are real lives, these are real losses. William lost his wife and beloved children, and he actually told the court that he was so utterly broken by what had happened that he'd even contemplated killing himself following the murder of his family. I completely relate to that. I think that anybody watching now, I would probably want to kill myself if my family had been killed that way. I think it takes strength beyond measure to actually remain and retain in this world when you've been through such a horrific loss, that poor man. And he said, I miss my entire family, my home, everything we had together. Later, he told reporters, Michaela was an 11-year-old little girl, tortured and killed in her own bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals. Hayley had a great future. She was a strong and a courageous person. And Jennifer helped so many kids. All that he could see was the loss of potential to this world that each of those individuals brought so much to. And what a polarity these criminals who took their lives evidence. What a polarity to these incredible humans we're talking about right now. And remember, guys, this is William's family. I tell these stories with an absolute knowledge that when I am doing so, I am talking about children and parents having their lives stolen. Society losing so much. This is more than just a crime channel and a crime story. This is a reality of the absolute losses that William has endured, and that the entire family surrounding William has also endured. Now, this case was so traumatizing for those who heard it. And I think just listening to this, a lot of you are parents, a lot of you have had abuse situations yourself. I know because I see the comments, a lot of you have been involved in some really horrendous things. So I think you all understand how trauma can impact all of us and any of us. But this case was so traumatic that all of the jurors were actually offered post-traumatic stress counselling following the trial. And that was the first time that happened in Connecticut's judicial history. So it was so serious that they believed that the impact on the jurors could have such big consequences that they needed to protect them aftercare-wise. And that's because during a 2-month trial, they had literally seen the most disturbing images and had also heard just horrific, graphic testimony. Now, on the 10th of December 2010, one thing I will say about Hayes is that he did express apparent remorse for his crimes. I'm going to say apparent remorse because I can only tell you what was said. You have to draw your own conclusions. And what he said was, "Death for me will be a welcome relief, and I hope it will bring some peace and comfort to those who I've hurt so much." I don't know whether that's true, but that's what he said. 19th of September 2011, Komisarjevsky's trial begins, and the prosecution argued that Komisarjevsky was Hayes' accomplice in the triple homicide killing spree. In addition, they had the fact that there was forensic evidence of the sexual assault that he carried out on 11-year-old Michaela. Now, extract from Komisarjevsky revealed that he also blamed William for the family's death. This is bizarre. It is so bizarre that Komisarjevsky and his accomplice Hayes somehow pin the fact that they carried out a triple homicide, rapes and awful assaults on children to William. In fact, this is what he said. He said, "If you don't want to defend your family, then take your chances with the criminal while police sit outside and follow protocol." Haley is a fighter. She continually tried time and time again to free herself. Michaela was calm. Mrs. Petit's courage is to be respected. She could have stayed inside the bank where she was safe. Oh, sod off. I mean, I'm sorry. Trying to make out that firstly they have respect for these victims, particularly for Haley, who was fighting like hell to try to protect her family, to get out of her restraints. The suggestion that because, the mother, Jennifer, didn't just scream hysterically in the bank and put her family at risk, somehow this criminal gives and affords them a level of respect. That just shows you how delusional he is. William was mortally injured to a point where he bled out 7 pints and his neighbour didn't recognise him, and he still managed to crawl there to try and get help. But again, minimising the impact, making about somebody else being the problem. So we can see that both of these criminals have such low morals and such low conscience that even when they are bound to rights, they can deflect their behaviour and blame someone else. Other extracts that they found revealed what we would acknowledge was Komisarjevsky's true nature, because when they looked at the extracts he'd written, he basically described the killings in detail to some degree. And he wrote, "I was faced with the shocking realisation that in some respects, I enjoy it. They were experiencing what I experience every day." Now, psychologically, what can we say about that? We can say that Komisarjevsky had had a horrible life, had been molested, had been raped, had had the worst things happen to him in his childhood, and that is unforgivable. But the idea that instead of that making him realise that those kind of actions are reprehensible and wrong and should never be repeated, he enjoyed seeing other people face the pain he had. I mean, that's as dark and blinded by blackness than any other statement I think I've come across. Now, the attorney who was representing Komisarjevsky tried to make out that Hayes was just the mastermind behind this, and essentially Komisarjevsky was simply this confused, easily led man, which none of us believe at all, ever, in the history of being alive. 13th of October 2011, you will not be surprised to know that Komisarjevsky was convicted on all 17 counts. Now, at that sentencing hearing, Komisarjevsky's attorney basically argued that he should be spared the death penalty. He said that Hayes had been the driving mastermind behind all of the murders, that it was he who had escalated the violence from the initial robbery, and basically that was the reason why he shouldn't get put to death. We all know that's not true, because obviously Hayes was with Jennifer getting the money whilst Komisarjevsky was taking naked pictures and assaulting children. So it makes no sense, it's not based in truth, and it just shows you again the desire to just make it so that one person takes the bigger rap than the other. But it doesn't work because the jury just come back and they recommend death. So on the 27th of January 2012, he also gets sentenced to death. Now again, after the trial, now I'm going to bring it in here because it is out there and it's important to always bring balance to these cases. Komisarjevsky did apparently express remorse. This is what he said. "I will never find peace within. My life will be a continuation of the hurt I caused. The clock is now ticking and I owe a debt I cannot repay." Yeah, you're right. You do. You owe a debt you can't repay. But hopefully, sweetheart, there'll be a force at some point in your destiny that makes damn sure that you pay every single penny for every moment of pain that you caused. I won't be able to do that in this lifetime, but I'm sure there's a few waiting for you in the next. And entries that were taken from his journal did also express similar things. So again, this is one of the things that they took from the extracts of his journal, and it said, "Michaela, angel of my nightmares, my pain to yours does not compare. How could I have turned my back, walking out that door, knowing your fear and sorrow? Michaela, Haley, Jennifer, forgive me please. I am damned. Take my life." Number one, I am so glad you are haunted. My God, I hope Michaela is the angel in your nightmares. I hope she taunts you. I hope she makes you live and relive what she experienced when you took her life from her and her family. I do. I hope that the spectres that inhabit your mind distort your mind to a point where just existing is unbearable. I hope that that is your experience day in, day out. Now, William was asked by the reporters if the death sentences that were given to the perpetrators gave him some kind of closure on his family's murder. And he replied this: "There is never closure. There is a hole with jagged edges. And over time, the edges may smooth out a little bit. But the hole in your heart and the hole in your soul is always there." I think that's beautifully described. And I think it just gives us that insight into something that the majority of us, a vast majority of us, will never have to face. But I think he puts it so eloquently, that hole that can never be replaced. Not that you would wish for it to be replaced, because that hole, that grief is love in disguise. It is your connection with the people that you've lost. Now, I can also tell you that there's been further insight into Hayes' character, and that was revealed in October 2011. And this is through a series of letters that were written by Hayes in custody, and those were actually intercepted by prison officials. And during this part, he actually bragged he'd killed 17 women and even made snuff films of one murder. So a snuff movie is a pornographic movie where you actually murder the person in it. And he's bragging that he's done this. He said that he allegedly abducted drunk women and would keep them tied to the bed for a weekend. And on one occasion he'd done that and killed her. And he actually said, "I got most of it on tape, 16 hours, 2 CDs. By far the best snuff film ever created." He said that he enjoyed inflicting pain and emotional abuse. He said that he used to use a date rape drug to sexually assault dozens of women, all aged between the ages of 14 and 25. And he also said that he used to like keeping his victims' trainers as trophies. One letter stated, "The 17 kill trophies meant the most to me. Each trophy was one of a kind and completely specific to the victim." Now, we could say that was all just bravado. We could say that was fantasy, couldn't we? But when they searched Hayes' flat, they unearthed multiple pairs of women's sports shoes. And we know that serial killers like mementos, right? And he's literally specifically relating to that. Another letter that they found actually described his first victim. And he said, "I was driving home from a bar when I noticed this girl hitchhiking on the entrance to the highway. She was short, hot, and the perfect victim." And according to Hayes, he then abducted her before sexually assaulting her in a motel, and then he asphyxiated her. Now, I can't say whether the claims are valid and genuine or whether they are just fantasy-based, but personally, when you think about what he did in the killings with that family, and then you think about all those sports shoes that they found, and the fact that he's actually describing these in detail, well, it could be that he is responsible for lots of unsolved murders in New England between the early 1980s and 2007. Also, those letters that were intercepted also criticised his accomplice, Joshua Komisarjevsky, because what he said about him was he lacked ruthlessness. And this is probably one of the most chilling things that I'm going to tell you as far as what was taken from the letter, because it kind of speaks to that desire of an individual who is so hell-bent on destruction that they're constantly trying to find people around them who may have a similarity to them. And it said, "I've searched my whole life for someone who could embrace and have the capacity for evil as I possess. I thought I'd finally found it in Josh. But events show Josh, while he had the proper evil intent, lacked in the most serious aspects: commitment and control." So he's actually been looking for a partner in crime, the Bonnie to his Clyde, so to speak. Now, following Hayes and Komisarjevsky's death sentences, Connecticut's General Assembly, which is its legislator and lawmaker, abolished the death penalty for all future cases. So it appeared at this point that they basically narrowly missed out on a change in the law which would have spared their lives. However, in conflict with the state law, Connecticut Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was and is unconstitutional. So they ruled that the judgment was able to apply to death sentences that had been imposed before the abolition of capital punishment. And that means that Hayes and Komisarjevsky's death sentences were subsequently commuted to life imprisonment without parole in 2015. I don't know how a lot of you feel about that. A lot of people feel frustrated when somebody's given a death sentence and then it gets commuted because the state changes their mind. But nonetheless, this is where they are. But bear in mind the fact that both of them talk about the fact they're haunted by the fact of what they did. Well, I hope that this means they will live out their days feeling that way, feeling haunted by the spectres of the murders they carried out. Now, since incarceration, Hayes has proven a very difficult prisoner, for lots of reasons. But also he's kind of done this conversion as well. In 2012, he converted to an Orthodox Jew. He grew a long grey beard, even wore a skull cap. Don't get me wrong, I know that the Jewish faith is an accepting one, but I doubt that they want this character, ideally. I'm sure that the local rabbi was going, "Have you considered, I don't know, maybe Christianity? They're an accepting lot. Why don't you just leave the whole Jewish bit to us lot? Just you maybe have a think there." But no, that's what he did. And if it's not enough that he's decided he's converted to Judaism, because obviously that will mean at some point in the future he'll be forgiven for his sins. No, you won't. The point is, he wasn't enough to just go ahead and do that. He then decided that he wanted to launch an unsuccessful suit against the Connecticut Department of Correction in 2014 for failing to provide Orthodox Jewish inmates with sufficiently kosher food. The arrogance, the superiority, drives me crazy. It's like, you'll eat what you're given. I'm sorry, I get it, guys. I know we've got to look after people's human rights. I appreciate that, but there is a point, isn't there? I don't want to pay my taxes so that you get the kind of food that you like because you've decided to become religious in this way. In fact, I don't care what your religion is. The moment you're in prison and you've done something heinous like murder and rape, eat what you're given, mate, or don't eat at all. Is it just me who feels that way? A little bit of anger came out then. A little bit of anger. Struggle a bit with child molesters and murderers, I'm not going to lie or apologise. Anyway, the court ruled that a rabbi had confirmed that the food was prepared to sufficiently kosher standards. However, it doesn't end there. Why would Hayes end there? And this really worries me. In 2019, so 2 years ago, Hayes declared that he was transgender, that he identifies as a woman, and that he claims to be affected by a medical diagnosis known as gender dysphoria, which means that you feel that your assigned gender at birth is not the actual gender that you are. So he's now started taking hormonal treatments. He then told the media, a lot of people accept it, but in this facility here, you have a lot of racists and bigots on staff, and they're not happy with it. There's 2 of us here that are feminine. He ultimately wishes to be transferred to a women's prison. Now listen, for all I know, Hayes is genuinely transgender, okay? He's claimed that he's known that he's been transgender since a teenager, but that his family wouldn't tolerate it. He actually said, I was diagnosed at 16 with sexual identity disorder. My family never acknowledged it and it was never treated. Now, I am the first person to say that must be very difficult for anybody who has genuine body dysphoria and genuinely wants to be the opposite gender, as long as they have had a lot of therapy and opportunities to really explore whether that is actually how they feel and has worked through trauma and has really come to that conclusion where it's right for them and they're given the right support, then of course we would support that, right? But we are talking about a child molester and rapist and murderer, and he wants to be transferred to a female prison. I am deeply conflicted by this, guys, because women deserve safe spaces. Now, of course, trans women are not violent perpetrators against other females. All trans women want is to be women. All trans men want is to be men. But this is a man who now wants to be a woman, to be transferred to a facility with women when he's been a sexual sadist and murderer, and that terrifies me because this is a highly dangerous person with psychopathic traits, and we know he's manipulative. We know that he doesn't care about exploiting people to gain. So is he exploiting the system to enable his reoffending? Does he just want to escape the male system because it's way more difficult than the female system? But to me, rapists and killers of women and children shouldn't be placed in a facility with women who are vulnerable. And a lot of prisons have women who are vulnerable. And also, let's be honest, if you're a man in a prison and you've gone down for raping, murdering and burning an innocent family, you're not going to be treated well by the other male offenders. So I can understand why he'd want to get out. But I'm deeply concerned and disconcerted by the idea that that woman, if indeed they are actually a genuinely trans woman, should be transferred anywhere where they have access to females who are vulnerable. And like I said, it's a discussion and a debate, but certainly I think we have to be very careful about individuals like them, because I'm not convinced that this is just to do with body dysphoria. I think there's more calculation behind this, I really do. Now, William, who we absolutely know was an incredible medic, he actually never returned to his medical practice following the murders. In fact, all he's done since is focus his energies on working on setting up foundations to honour the memory of his family. He's an incredible man. 2007, he established the Michaela Rose Petit 14 Scholarship Fund of the Chase Collegiate College. Also, he established the Haley's Hope and Michaela's Miracle MS Memorial Fund. And that's because obviously his wife Jennifer suffered from multiple sclerosis. What an incredible man. In 2016, William was elected to the State House of Representatives and actually has a really promising political career, which just speaks volumes about the tenacity and the resilience of this man. And also I want you to know that even though his life was marred and tarred and broken and has a void that is huge, left by the loss of his beautiful family, he has since remarried, and that was with the blessing of Jennifer's family. He met his current wife, Christine Paulus, while she was volunteering at a family foundation fundraising event in 2012, and they were married the same year. And in 2013, they had a son together, also called William. That makes me feel a level of peace that he has that opportunity. And William Sr. actually stated this: "Our son is a beautiful Thanksgiving and Christmas gift. He is very lovable and sweet. I will tell him of his two big sisters, Hayley and Michaela, how they always helped others with smiles on their faces. I am sure they and their mother Jennifer are smiling down upon him." The Petit Family Foundation, established in honour of Jennifer and her daughters, is amazing because it creates funds that are given to foster the education of young people, especially women in the sciences, basically to improve the lives of those affected by chronic illnesses and also to support the efforts to protect and help those affected by violence. William says Christine has been his absolute rock because he still has nightmares about his family's deaths. And he says on a good night he gets about 5 hours sleep. On a bad night he gets about 2. He still keeps the light on in the living room all the way through the night. He's so affected by it. And I think that that's one of the most difficult things for anyone who's been a victim of crime. Forget the fact that William went through the ultimate loss, the ultimate agony, the ultimate pain. It's the fact that these individuals who come into your life to exploit you, all they care about is what they can get. They never think about what they take from you permanently. For William, he didn't just lose his family, his future, the opportunity to watch his children grow, develop, become the amazing humans he had brought them up to be. He had his sense of safety stolen. And albeit that he has a son and a partner and he's working hard to create legacy, those two men, all they wanted was to exploit whatever they could achieve from this family without any cause of concern about the impact that that could have. And ultimately, with somebody like William, that's an impact that will last forever. And that's a shout out to all of you who come on here who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. It isn't something that people just get over. And even when you've been through treatment and healed, it's still there. There are still moments, triggers, experiences. I hope that you found this case one that at least shows us that in spite of the fact that those girls and that amazing mother never made it through the crime, their legacy lives on through the love of the father and husband. And I also hope that it gives you a tiny bit of hope that even in the most terrible of times, there can still be light. And for William, he at least has found some. Thanks for joining me. I would love you to comment on this. It's brutal. It's real. I hope we've done the case justice. Thanks for all your support. Leave me a comment, give me a like, subscribe if you found this interesting. Join me for a live chat. I know it'll have been going on whilst I've been talking about this. Let me know your thoughts. And again, thanks for all your help with Patreon. I'm going to keep bringing you content Wednesdays and Sundays, always, because I'm consistent and I do crime. And if you like both of them, it's a channel for you. Take care, guys. Be safe.